Hey everyone, it's TK Friday, my favorite day of the week. Today it's TK and the Deadvlei. This image comes to us by Carlo Freddy. He watches TK Fridays, and if you have any submissions for editing on a TK Friday, please submit them. But we're going to do a full edit on this today. Stay tuned. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Joy of Editing with Dave Kelly, and thank you for joining me on yet another TK Friday. Today it's TK and the Deadvlei. Now this image comes to us by Carlo Freddy, and thank you Carlo for this beautiful image. I love this image, and we're going to do a full edit utilizing the TK8 plugin for Photoshop. And I also have a PDF download for you for all the notes of all the different steps. We have like 11 different steps in this image. It's not that hard. I'll be showing some different ways that we can do selections without actually using Photoshop selection tools. We'll be doing all the selections with the TK8 plugin for Photoshop. So there'll be some interesting things here. With each image we do, your knowledge of the TK8 plugin for Photoshop will increase. We'll be using some of the same methods, but we'll be introducing some new methods as well. So your knowledge base will build and build and build. And also, Carlo is letting us use his image for learning purposes, so you can download this PSD file along with the PDF notes. If you don't yet own the TK8 plugin for Photoshop, it's only $29. I'll have a link right below this video in the description. Just click on that, and that'll take you to Tony Kuiper's web store. And you can use my promo code DK15. You'll save 15% off anything on Tony Kuiper's web store, including training videos. And when you do that, it helps support the Joy of Editing with Dave Kelly, and it helps me to keep these videos coming to you each and every TK Friday. If you're new to TK8, I recommend the TK8 combo, where you get the TK8 plugin plus a video guide for $49. It's a great value and a great starting point if you're new to the TK8 plugin for Photoshop. I highly recommend it, along with the TK Friday videos. So let's get started. I love this image. These are old, dead, ancient trees found in Namibia in the Deadvlei. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. This image started out in Lightroom. I did some basic adjustments. I used a linear profile on it and brought it here into Photoshop. And this is how your PSD file will look. You'll have the background layer. Now, I did do a crop on it. I'm using browser proofing to check the original image with the crop. Now, here's the original image, and the tab to the right of that, this is the cropped image. It just tightens it up a bit, and I think it looks a little bit more pleasing. One thing I failed to mention last week, and this is really important when you're doing browser proofing, once you're in web sharpening and you've got everything set up the way I showed you, after you click fit the first time, and the image closes and it's saved into that special folder that you gave it, it's saved with a file name image.jpg, and that's what the browser is looking for when you click refresh. Or if you have a tab and you want to put this image in there for the first time, you would click on the bookmark file that you saved for browser proofing. I'll link the video I made last week at the end of this video. In case you haven't seen it yet, you may want to check it out if you want to start using browser proofing or just need a refresher. I'm going to X out of here for now. And now all you have to do is either Command or Control click on this web sharpen icon. And as I do, you can see it runs through its process. And now you can go over to your web browser, and if you want to put it in for the first time, go to the bookmark, or if you just want to refresh that tab, just do a refresh. I think it's Command or Control R to refresh. And now for the edit. The first thing we're going to do is my favorite thing. I'm going to get rid of the color grading tool. I just clicked on the X because it hides the TK8 plugin for Photoshop. For me, my first step is always to do some balance and contrast. Again, minimal edits from Lightroom. I come up to the luminosity icon here, click it. I always choose mids 3. It protects me from clipping shadows and highlights. I'll put that to a color grading tool. And then I want to just adjust it and get it to look a little bit better than it already does. I'm going to start out with shadows. I'm going to darken the shadows up a little bit, maybe somewhere right around there. I'll click the gray block and open up the midtones a bit. I'm going to just take the color grading slightly into blue, just a little bit, just to make that sky look a little bit more blue. And then let's check the highlights out. I'm just going to drag this to the right. to maybe right about there, and I think it looks good. Now here is the before. Now here is the after, and I think we're off to a good start. And now I study the image, and I feel the sky needs to be a little bit lighter, so let's X out of the color grading tool. It doesn't change anything here. Now we can see the multi-mask panel. And to select that sky, it's all blue. All we need to do is click on this color picker, which opens up the color picker tool, find a color that represents the sky, click right here, and this is going to help us, after I click OK, to make a mask. And you can see I have a decent mask started here. Now we have this slider that we can drag it to the right, and I'm going to take it the whole way over to the right and see how we really lighten that sky up. Now we can further lighten it, because remember, in a mask, white reveals and black conceals, and I want to adjust the sky. So let's go to levels and we can refine that. So I'm going to take this midtone slider and I'm dragging it to the left until I see that sky lighten up a good bit. Now I'm going to take the highlight slider and drag it over to make it even lighter. And then I'm going to take, I can see a little bit of light in here, so that's not going to hurt anything, but I can drag the shadow and just drag this over like this, just to clean that up. That's all I want. But look at that perfect selection. We can close the levels here, the properties panel. Now the sky selected perfectly, but I got some white areas down in here that I don't want. I'm going to show you something new. This is something that Tony showed me the other day. I'm going to grab my lasso tool. I'm just typing L. And I'll just select this whole area with my lasso tool, like really quick like this. Now we could use a brush, a black brush, and just paint that away, but this is a little quicker. So make a selection. And then with either the CX panel or combo panel, right here is the icon to invert a selection. So click that. That inverts the selection. This is a little trick. Click the mask, and click cancel. And that is magically taken away. So that's a little tip that Tony Kuiper showed me, so thank you for that, Tony. And just like that, we have a beautiful sky selection, all done with the TK8 plugin for Photoshop. Now we have to output this, and I love the color grading tool, so I'm just going to output it to a color grading tool, and you'll see there's my mask right there, just selecting the sky. Now let's adjust it. So we're going to start out with midtones. I'm going to click on midtones, and then we're going to lighten up the midtones to lighten up that sky. Now you don't see anything happening when you move this slider till you release it and let it go. And I think right about here, and then I'm going to go to shadows, believe it or not. I always experiment, and I'm going to drag this to the left a little bit. But see how it makes the sky look a little more blue. And after you've done that and you get the sky looking the way you like with the shadows, maybe come back to the highlights and maybe retweak if you feel you want it just a little bit lighter. And I think maybe just a wee bit more right there. Here's the before and now the after. Now remember, this is a color grading tool, so I'm on midtone. So I'm just going to drag this into blue just a little bit, just to add a little bit more blue. I like that. Now that I've lightened the sky, I'm looking at this distant dune and I'm thinking I want it a little bit lighter. So to do that, what do you think would be a good way of approaching that? You know, it's a solid color here, so let's try the color picker again. Let's X out of the color grading tool so we can see the multi-mask panel. And let's grab the color picker tool and let's click a color that represents this entire area. And I think right around here looks pretty good, and we'll click OK. And there's our mask. Now we need to do some refining. Let's go ahead and work right here, and we can see if we can tighten this color up. So I'm going to drag this bottom slider to the left. And when I do, you see how this is getting darker? Now you can only drag this so far. Once you meet this circle up here, it won't go any further. But we can also lighten it up more here by dragging this slider to the right. And I think right about there looks pretty good, right there, because I don't want to lose any detail in here. And then we can even tighten with this slider here. This will feather it, but we can tighten it up like this. Get it as, get it looking. Again, I want this as light as I can get it, but we're not done yet. Now we can bring the levels into action, or curves, whichever you prefer. I like to use levels. It's easier. And I like to start with the midtone slider, and I'll drag it to the left to maybe right around here. And see how that's getting lighter in there. Now it's still too light down here, so I can take the shadow slider and bump it to the right and darken that up. You see that? And now I can take the highlight slider and drag it over to the left and lighten it up. Maybe right about there looks pretty good. But we have some areas down here that we don't want and some areas up here. So we can do another mask the mask. This is different. This is the typical way you would use mask the mask. You would get a lasso tool, and we're just going to lasso right around this area like this. You know, right like so. And now all we have to do is click the mask icon. And we don't need any feathering. If you need feathering, there's feathering here. We're just going to click cancel. And look, we have a perfect selection. Now there's a few little light areas in here, but believe it or not, that will not hurt a thing. We can even come back to this slider and drag it to the right a little bit more. And yeah, I can lighten that up just a wee bit more, as the Scottish say. And now that we've made this mask, we need to output it. I'm going to use my favorite again, the color grading tool. And look at that beautiful mask, all with the TK8 plugin for Photoshop. And now let's make an adjustment. I'll start with midtones because I want to lighten it up. So I'm going to drag this to the right to see how far I want it to go. Maybe right about there. And let's warm it up just a little bit. So I'm just going to take this and drag it this way just a little bit. Just to give it a slight warming. This is why I love the color grading tool. It's so intuitive. And now let's go to shadows because we don't want to lose any of these shadows in here. And I'll drag this to the left to darken up some of the shadows. You see that? And it also enriches the color when I bring this to the left. And I think that looks really nice. Now let's take a look. Here is the before and here is the after. Whenever you add extra contrast to something, you will automatically add a little bit more saturation. That's just a byproduct. Let me go ahead and close this properties panel. But this is what the color grading tool has given us. Isn't that cool? Could you imagine if you had to make that by just dragging these sliders around? It'd be kind of tough. And now as I study the image, I think I want these shadows to be a little bit darker, and also it'll bring out some texture out here in this sand. So let's do that next. Let me go ahead and X out of the color grading tool. Remember, nothing will change here. And here's a really good method for darkening shadows. Grab yourself a curves adjustment layer. It could be levels. It doesn't really matter. We're not going to make adjustments here. So we can close this properties panel. And I'm going to change it to a multiply blend mode, which will darken everything. But here's something I'm doing a little bit differently. I'm adding a black mask to this to hide the adjustment first. Because if I click on multiply, it'll kind of get all dark and you'll say like, oh, that looks horrible. So if we don't want to see it getting dark, because we know it'll get dark, we can put the black mask on first and then click multiply. Because we're going to make a mask, obviously, for these shadows. And let's come to luminosity masks. Click this icon right here, and let's find the right luminosity mask. Now, I like to start, it's going to be darks, right? So we want a mask that'll turn light in the dark areas, so they'll be getting the adjustment. So I'm going to try a darks 1, and I like to keep refining. So that's too broad of a mask, so we'll try a darks 2. That's getting closer, and we'll try a darks 3. And you know what? I chose a darks 2 because we're picking up a little bit more area back in here. So I think we're going to go with a darks 2. We need to refine it a bit, so let's grab a levels. And I'm going to take the midtone slider and drag it to the left to lighten the shadow areas up a little bit. And I'm going to take my shadow slider, drag it to the right just to tighten things up. And to lighten even further, I'm going to take this highlight slider and drag it to maybe right about here. And I think we have a nice representation. All these little light areas are little textures back here that'll pop out a little bit. And now we're going to output this to a black mask painting through a selection. So you click that icon. And now we're going to paint this wherever we want it. And this is a beautiful thing to do because I'm going to start with 100% opacity because I'm just going to paint over here. But believe it or not, if I paint this a second time, I'll add even more darkening. So I can just tailor this to the way I like it. I'm trying to stay away from the trees, but I'll show you what happens because I will oversplash those trees a little bit. And just, figure out what areas you want to bring some texture out, like back in here. I'm going to hit this. I'm lifting my brush each time you see me go here. So I'm going to go in here and, I'm just adding texture and to do that, I'm just making the shadows darker and the textures naturally come out. So just paint away. And this is where you're an artist and you have your artist's license. I like that when Bob Ross used to say that when he was making a painting. Every painter, when they start painting, is giving a painter's license. I believe that's how he said it. but I'm just going to come in here and, just play around. And not really play, kind of play. To me, it's the joy of editing, and it's happy and it's fun. If it's not fun, why do it, right? Hopefully you're having fun. Hey, and leave me comments and questions. Are you enjoying TK Fridays? You have any questions? Tony looks at the questions and he answers a lot of the questions himself because he is the guy, right? Thank God for Tony Kuiper. So here we go. So let's take a look. Here is the before and here is the after. Now, we can look at this mask by clicking this icon right here, and we see the mask. And you can see I overshot the trees a little bit, but just get the opposite color of what you painted with. We were painting with white, right? So now we're going to paint with black. And at that 100% opacity, I'll make my brush smaller, and we still have a selection. See the selection indicator? And look, I can just paint away these little guys in here where I overshot if I don't want that shadow on those trees. So I wouldn't bore you, I went ahead off camera and did the rest of this thing. Okay, so there it is. Now if we click this icon again, there's our result. Now here is the before and here's the after. Now don't forget this. You have a selection here, so don't forget. Click this button right here on the CX or Combo panel and deselect your selection. Let me go ahead and get rid of this Properties panel. But one more time, look down in here for the texture and shadows to get deeper. Here's the before, and here is the after. Isn't that cool? The joy of editing. We're coming along. Let's see how far we've come so far. I'm going to use my before-after action. Here's the overall before, and here's the after. So we're moving in a beautiful direction, I think. To me, the best way of editing is just to study your image and let it speak to you. Your eyes will tell you what it needs. And I think the midtones need lifted up a little bit, need slightly lightened. So what I'm going to do is, first off, I'm in the background layer. Click on the top layer. This is a really cool tip. Now follow me closely here. Click on the luminosity mask icon and get a midtones 1. This is what you want, a midtones 1. And I normally output to a curves adjustment, but I'm developing a new idea, and that is outputting to a color grading tool. So let me click on the color grading tool. And as you know, a color grading tool works with a curves adjustment. But what I want to do here is, now I have a midtones mask. I'm going to click screen, and that's going to lighten my midtones. But when I use a color grading tool, I have an added benefit. I can use color grading. So I'm going to click on the midtone block, and I'm going to drag this block up into this area right here and slightly warm up the image. So that's a new tip, and as I said, this is something I've been working with, and it really works out well. So instead of using a curves all the time, sometimes you'll see me using a color grading tool, which will achieve the same result, only I have the intuitive nature of the color grading tool if I want to color grade. Let's do a before and after of this midtone lightening. Here's the before, and here is the after. After all, it is a desert scene. There's a lot of light out in a desert. Now, when I look at this sand down here looks a little bit overall too light, so I want to slightly darken it up a little bit. Let me go ahead and get rid of the color grading tool so we can see the multi-mask panel. Now, there's not a lot of color down here, so let's try a luminosity mask to pick this area. And let's go through. We have a lights 1 where it defaults at. Let's try lights 2. Let's try lights 3. Remember, I'm just trying to isolate the sand. Let's try a lights 4. Well, this whole area gets a lot darker, and it's still not light enough here, but I'm going to try this lights 4. I'll grab a levels, and I'll start to move the midtones to the left to lighten up the sand. I'm going to take the highlights and lighten it up even more. And now I'm going to pull the shadow slider to the right. And I think I like it. Maybe I'll lighten it up a little bit more. I think that's going to work out okay. I just want to slightly darken it. The trees won't be getting the adjustment because they're dark, just the sand. What I'm going to do next is grab a marquee tool, a rectangular marquee tool. So click that. And we're going to mask the mask again. So I'm going to make a marquee right on this bottom area, just like that. We're going to grab the mask tool, and I don't need any feathering, so just click cancel. You won't get feathering, and look at that, a perfect selection. Let's output that. I'm going to output it to a color grading tool. I'm going to change the blend mode to multiply and watch that sand when I hit multiply. See it get darker? Now it's too dark, so just take your opacity. I like to take it the whole way off and just bring it up slowly to the right and just darken it to the amount I like. And I'm at 26. I think in my notes I was at 20. So I'll make it 20, just like the notes. So here is the before and here's the after. See, slightly darker, but remember I have a color grading tool. I'm going to use midtones and drag this up to right here, and it just warms the sand up just a little more. Here is the before and the after. These little attention to details will pay you big dividends in your final result. Believe it or not, they do. Now, as I study the image, I think I want the trees a little bit lighter. Now, the trees are darker tones, but I'm going to lighten them, but I'll show you some little techniques here as you follow me through. Let's go ahead and get rid of this properties panel. Let me close the color grading tool. Actually, I could have left that color grading tool open. Oh well. Just click the color grading tool, and you got to click the plus. It will not get applied to a layer unless you click the plus, so click the plus. I'll use the screen blend mode to lighten these trees, but first let's put a black mask on that layer, and then we'll click screen. Now that we have the color grading tool in place right here, we can click X. It's still there. We need to see the multi-mask panel. Let's click on the luminosity mask icon, and let's find a darks mask to select the trees, because we want these trees to go lighter to make the mask. Let's try darks 1. Pretty good, but not enough isolation in other areas. Let's try darks 2. Let's try darks 3. And yes, darks 3 is the way to go, but we need to refine it. So let's click the levels adjustment. I'll take the midtone slider and drag it to the left a little bit to lighten those up so they get more of a selection. I'll take the highlight slider to lighten it up even more. And now I'll tighten it by moving the shadow slider. So I only isolate those trees. Let's lighten them a little more. And I think the highlights is pretty good right there. So now we have a really nice selection. Let me hide the properties panel. And then we need to output this. I'm going to output this to a black mask painting through a selection with a white brush. I'm going to build it up slowly. So this time I want my opacity at 30%. I'm just typing the 3 key. Now remember, I'm painting through a selection. You can see it right here. And if you want to see what your mask actually looks like, in case you forgot, you can click this icon right here to edit a selection. Click it, and there's the mask, right? So we can be very liberal as we paint here. We're not going to be affecting too much. We got to stay away from these shadow areas, but other than that, we're good. Now click this icon, and that puts your selection back on again. And the selection is hidden, but it's there. We can't see it. And so now you can adjust your brush accordingly. Now I can make my brush a lot bigger up in here, and I'm just painting down here one pass. I'm going to go over here and up here. If I don't lift my brush, I'm just putting down that 30%. And I just want to lighten them up. If I want it lighter, I can hit this a second time, hit this a second time, maybe a third time here, maybe over here, just so we can see some details out in here. And I'm going to paint up in here and over here and down, up in here, over here. And I'll just paint. Nice soft edge brush. It doesn't really matter. It could actually be a hard edge in this. I'm going to hit this a couple more times. I'm lifting my brush just like that. Now let's take a look. Here is the before and here is the after. But wait, there's more, and here's a tip coming up. Whenever you lighten something that was dark, you tend to lose some contrast. So we need to build that back up. Now remember, we have a color grading tool. So let's click on the color grading tool. I'll start with shadows and click on the shadow block. And what I want to do is darken up the shadows. And that's going to build the contrast back. And now I can lighten it even more by clicking on midtones, and we'll drag the midtone slider to the right. It won't affect it too much. And I'll also go to the highlights and I'll drag it to the right. You don't see much effect taking place there, but it is affecting it slightly. Now here's the before and here's the after. But again, before and after. So they're lighter, but we have a little bit of contrast. And on the midtone block, I'm just going to warm those trees up a little bit. like somewhere around there. Here is the before and here's the after. And I think that's a nice touch. And now how about a little bit of soft pop? Now we don't have to deselect our selection. It'll get deselected. After I come into TK Actions and click on soft pop, that selection will go away. And now you see we have a nice soft pop. Here's before and here's after. Now it's way too strong. So what I'm going to do is come to fill and take this fill back to like 10%. Now here is the before and here is the after. We're bringing out some texture. We're adding a little bit of extra saturation to the overall image. Again, before and after. And if it's too strong, you could take the opacity or you could take the fill back a little more, but I would take the opacity and maybe pull it back just a little bit, maybe to like 90%. Here is the before and here is the after, but I like the soft pop. The sky's looking good. It really helps. And it brings out detail. If you'll notice these trees here, let me go ahead and zoom in. I'm going to click the plus here a couple times. Now, check it out. Here is the before. Now, watch the texture in the tree and the background. Here's the before, and here's the after. But see that nice texture start to really come out, and I love it. Now, you can go back to full screen by clicking this icon here. I'm just going to go back, click the minus, and come right to here again. But I love it so far. I feel I want to lighten up the midtones another time, so what we'll do is let me X out the color grading tool. Let's come to luminosity mask. Very simply, get a midtones 1. We'll output it. Now, I've been using the color grading tool, but I don't need color grading. I'm just going to output it to a curves adjustment layer. We can close the properties because I'm not going to do anything with the curves. And I'm going to change the blend mode to screen to lighten. Now, that's too light. Here's the before and here's the after. I'm going to take the opacity, take it the whole way off, and build it up slowly. And I think right here at 25. Now check it out. Here's a before and here's an after. Just a slight lightening of the midtones. And again, attention to details makes all the difference at the final finish of the edit. Now I'll introduce you to a new action. And I'm sure somebody has said, you know what? There's a dust button that's really bugging me. And it gets stronger the more I edit this image. But let's use a new action. Come to TK Actions. And we have an action to clean dust. Click it and check it out. It zooms the image in for you. Now we can move it around and we can really examine and find dust spots here. Now there's a really cool feature here that you need to use, and that's amplify dust. And if you click right here or double click it, it opens up a levels adjustment, and then you could use the highlights and the midtones to amplify that dust. In other words, if I take this to the right or left, and you can see that dust is getting a little more amplified. Now let's take the highlight slider. You see that? Now we can really hone it in and see that dust. So just play with it so you can really see the dust. And there's a big spot right there. This action sets you up with a spot healing tool. What you need to do after you've amplified the dust with this adjustment is go back to this hill clone layer. So just click on that. And then you can just paint your dust away like that. And let's move over this area here. I think here's some dust here, here. Call it out if you see more. And again, you can play with that amplified dust if you need to, if you don't have it quite right. And let's just examine it. Oh, here's some over here. Look, right here. Clean that away out of our nice, pretty blue sky. Look, and here's one down here. I'm sure I missed one. I'll miss one, and you'll point it out to me. Look, here's one right here. So I got rid of that. Anything else? Oh, right up here. Here's another one. And I think I'm pretty good. Now, when you're done removing dust, all you have to do is click the clean dust again, and you're back to a full screen. I'm just going to click the minus so we can see here. I'll close the properties panel, and now the dust is gone. And now one final step, a vignette. So let's come to TK Actions, grab a basic vignette, the first one, and I just take the Gaussian blur just the way it is, click OK, and here's the before and here's the after. Now I don't like it up in the sky, so we'll remove it from the sky, but before I do that, let's double click right here and open up the layer style properties. Let's do blend diff on the underlying layer. Just to protect the shadows, I'm going to take this shadow slider and drag it over here to right around 19, and now we're going to feather it. This just protects the shadows from getting blocked up. And maybe somewhere right around there. Click OK. Let's take a look. Here's the before and here is the after. Now let's protect it from the sky. So let's click on the layer mask and get a black brush at 100% opacity. So type your 0 key to get you to 100%. Let's get a nice big brush, and I just want to remove it up from that sky. Make sure I get it entirely off of the sky. So I think that's pretty good. Let's take a look. Here is the before, and here is the after. Again, before and after. So I like that little bit of a vignette. It might be a little too strong, so let's pull it back. With the opacity slider, I'll just slide this to the left, and I think I'm going to take it back to around 33%. Here's the before, and here's the after. And with that, we are complete. Now let's take a look at our overall before and after. Here's our overall before, and here's our after. And one final thought, this is a non-destructive workflow. And that means you can come back to any layer and readjust any of these adjustments if you so choose to do that. So just bear that in mind. It's very important. One final thing before I go, I'm going to command or control click on this web sharpening icon, and that'll save it as an image, JPEG in that one file folder. And let me come over to my web browser. And this is where we started out, and I'm on this tab right here. If I refresh it by doing a Command or Control R, you'll see there's that image. Isn't that cool right there? Well, there it is, everyone. Another TK Friday. TK and the Deadvlei, image by Carlo Freddy. Thank you so much, Carlo. If you enjoyed the tutorial today, please give it a like, share it with your friends, and subscribe. Click that bell notification. Every time I upload a new tutorial, you'll be notified. I want to thank each and every one of you for joining me today in the Joy of Editing with Dave Kelly. I'll see you all right here next time, but until then, happy editing!